Tonight, born into a war with no escape. The children trying to survive after the end of Gaza's ceasefire. Among the horror, a 1-month-old girl was pulled from the rubble today after her parents were killed in an airstrike. This father and husband must mourn, though. His family among the 500 people Gaza's health ministry says have died this week. Also ahead, Trump puts his powers to the test once again with plans to shut down the U.S. Education Department. The key question, though, will this new executive order get through Congress and the courts?
It sounds strange, doesn't it? Department of Education, we're going to eliminate it, and everybody knows it's right.
As Trump courts another legal challenge, NBC sources claim Elon Musk paid Republican congresspeople thousands of dollars to support plans to impeach judges. We'll get reaction from the Democrats. Also tonight, as the Prime Minister convenes European military chiefs, he says it's clear Vladimir Putin will breach a peace deal unless Ukraine is given security guarantees. And how to avoid an online overload. We hear how to stop being overwhelmed by social media. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Welcome to the programme. The scale of destruction in Gaza is to many incomprehensible. More than 49,000 people killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. 500 of those killed this week alone. But these numbers simply do not tell you the full story. Instead, consider this man. His name, Alaa Abu Halal. What you're seeing is Alaa in a state of mourning. This week's strikes killed his wife, Afnan, their unborn child, and his 14-month-old son, Mohammed. 14 months. Let that sink in. A toddler younger than the war itself. All Mohammed ever knew was bullets and bombs. Now he's dead, his family torn apart. He's not alone. These pictures from Associated Press show a baby girl being pulled from the rubble of an airstrike. A moment of hope, it would seem. But this strike also killed the girl's parents. Another family torn apart. The resumption of fighting this week provoked outcry. But is there the will on either side to stop it? And is there the pressure? Tonight, the White House was asked if it would urge restraint. Have a listen.
Well, the president made it very clear to Hamas that if they did not release all of the hostages, there would be all hell to pay.
So is there any chance of a ceasefire, or are we about to see, as Donald Trump's promised, all hell breaking loose? Today, Hamas and the Houthis in Yemen fired rockets back at Israel. They were intercepted, but it's a disturbing sign that a regional war could reignite. In a moment, we'll hear from Israel's ambassador to the UK and the former right-hand man of the Palestinian president. We'll also speak to a British doctor who operated on children during this conflict. His eyewitness account in a moment. But first, our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has this report.
The days in Gaza, once again, are spent burying the dead. In a matter of seconds, in the darkness of last night, Alaa Abu Halal lost his wife, his son, and his unborn child. Their small tent gave them some shelter, but no protection. This morning, he laid into the ground all the close family that he had. Alaa is now alone in life, but not in grief. Not in Gaza, where everyone is mourning someone.
That the war returns, and at its start, the targets are the innocent, the pure, those who've barely seen the world. This is something heavy and difficult. You flee during war to keep your family and children safe, yet here he is, dead. They were all martyred.
This morning, elsewhere in Gaza, and after another airstrike, another baby was pulled from the rubble. This time, alive. Her father, though, was killed.
When we asked people, they said she's a month old and she's been under the rubble. Since dawn, she's been screaming and falling silent from time to time until we were able to get her out a short while ago, and thank God she's safe.
Israel has expanded its ground operations to all areas of Gaza. The IDF has warned of further escalations. Israel has also prevented the entry of humanitarian aid for weeks. No food, no water, no fuel, no medicine is allowed in. That and the heavy airstrikes has pushed hospitals to breaking point. Hospitals that were already largely destroyed from 15.5 months of war. The British government has reiterated its opposition to Israel's actions and said that Israel must allow aid into Gaza immediately.
I could have been a little clearer in the House on Monday. Our position remains that Israel's actions in Gaza are a clear risk of breaching international humanitarian law.
Today, for the first time since Israel broke the ceasefire 3 days ago, Hamas fired rockets towards Tel Aviv. One was intercepted and 2 fell in open areas. No one was injured. Right now, the prospect of new ceasefire talks and the prospect of a new ceasefire are getting more remote every passing day. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, joining me now is Dr. Nizam, a British surgeon who's worked in Gaza during the conflict. He also testified to Parliament about what he witnessed volunteering at Nasser Hospital in the Gazan city of Khan Younis. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, it's utterly gut-wrenching seeing the images of children in Gaza, the way that they are suffering. You've seen it firsthand on the ground. Just your reaction to what we've seen since this ceasefire has broken down in the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm deeply, deeply saddened, and I have to say I'm actually appalled to see this happening again. Israel has clearly broken the ceasefire, and 600 people killed in 3 days, the majority of them women and children, just as when I was there last year. 60 to 70% of the casualties we operated on were women and children. So these are civilians who are being killed indiscriminately, and I think it's just terrible.
Yeah, I mean, we just showed the story of a 14-month-old who was killed, a child that was born into this conflict, younger than this war, who knew nothing but bullets and bombs, and now dead as a result of this war. And it's just one story of thousands of children who have died in a similar way, but also there are thousands more that have been left orphans.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the saddest things is that in Gaza, when there were still paper notes available in the hospital, it became commonplace to write WCNSF, which was Wounded Child No Surviving Family. And I saw plenty of those children in Nasser Hospital. There's no way that these civilian casualties and particularly the children can be justified in any sense at all. There are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands now who've died, and it isn't their fault.
There was just a small moment of hope, even though we all knew how fragile this truce was. How worried are you now that this conflict is going to continue to escalate and go back to what it was just a few months ago?
Yeah, I'm very worried. The ceasefire obviously was very fragile, but the concern was that Netanyahu, for his own political purposes, would want the war to continue. Obviously, given President Trump's statements, he's felt enabled, and it's difficult to see an end to it now.
The children who have died as a result of the conflict, that's one thing. But as we said, there are thousands of children that live in Gaza and have endured this conflict and have suffered. As I said, you've seen it. Just talk us through the mental health impact on these children who are dealing with constant sounds of drones and bombs and bullets every single day.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to underestimate the effect on those who've survived. They are terrified. The drones are there 24 hours a day, and the drones don't just give oversight of what's going on, but they also bring death. So the sound of a drone is terrifying. Bombs and missiles constantly falling. There are no safe areas in Gaza. There never were. Most of the casualties that we operated on were from the so-called green humanitarian zone, where a bomb would just be dropped indiscriminately on a group of tents. So the children were absolutely terrified. And that's become now for getting on for 2 years, a year and a half now, that's become their normality. And I think the effect that that's going to have in the future on them is absolutely tragic.
Yeah, and Dr. Mahmoud, as we were saying, we spoke to you when you returned from your last trip to Gaza in August of last year. And at the time, you were talking about just how fragile the whole health system was then. It was, you know, on the brink of collapse, and you were using all sorts of it was makeshift, the equipment you were using and what you didn't have. How bad is it now, based on the conversations you're having with colleagues who are still on the ground working in these conditions?
I haven't heard this week about the situation medically, but I know that as recently as December, one of my colleagues from the UK went back out to Nasser hospital, and things were actually a lot worse than when we were there earlier in 2024. And at that time, we were running out of gloves, gauze, sterile gowns, and so on. So it really was impossible to provide an adequate medical service. We know that in the last 2 weeks before Israel abandoned the ceasefire, it had stopped humanitarian supplies, aid supplies into Gaza. So I would expect the situation is as bad as it was in December, if not worse.
Dr. Mahmoud, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Now let's give you a closer look at the state of the IDF's expanding ground operation and those areas in Gaza coming under fresh attack. Now, Israel's military mainly hit Khan Younis in the south and Beit Lahia in the north. Israel also announced a new evacuation order for Bani Suhaila near Khan Younis. It expands on the existing evacuation order for the edges of the territory issued on Tuesday after the ceasefire broke in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Tonight, the IDF has announced an additional ground operation in Rafah, and there is an ongoing ground operation in the Netzarim corridor, the key road that separates the north of Gaza from the south. Today, Hamas fired 3 rockets out of Gaza at Tel Aviv. One of them was intercepted and nobody was injured. Both Israel and the US have blamed Hamas for the ceasefire breaking down, saying the militant group has refused to meet Israel's demand to release more hostages in return for the resumption of talks. But this was not part of the original truce agreement. Earlier this evening, my colleague Sophie Ridge asked Israel's ambassador to the UK about this contention. Have a listen.
The phases included releasing hostages. It didn't happen. Hamas breached the agreement. It's so simple. There is nothing here not to understand.
Hamas released all of the hostages that were agreed in phase 1. And phase 2 has not started.
No, that wasn't the deal. Witkoff said, we will extend the ceasefire if Hamas will release hostages. I'm sure you remember that. And then that was the point where Hamas breached the agreement by not releasing the hostages. Basically, Hamas is not releasing hostages anymore. He's refusing to his part in the deal. And this is why Hamas breached the deal. And Israel has no other choice rather than putting pressure on a terror organization. We are not dealing with nice British government. We are dealing with terrorists. We are not dealing with civilized people. We are dealing with people that brutally murdered more than 2,000 Israelis throughout the years. So we're talking about people that don't care about the life of the hostages or the life of the Palestinians in Gaza. So if you want the suffer to finish, all we need to do, both of us, is to say Hamas must release all the 59 hostages. This is the only way out of the circle.
That was Israel's ambassador to the UK there. Let's bring in Rafiq al-Husseini, a former chief of staff to the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Thank you so much, Mr. Husseini, for joining us here on the programme. The devastation we're seeing in Gaza, the finger of blame is being pointed at Hamas by both Israel and the United States. We heard there from the Israeli ambassador to the UK. Just your reaction.
Well, my reaction is this is really silly because we know that for Israel and the United States today, it seems every Palestinian is a terrorist. There is no partner. They don't want to talk to anybody. They don't agree on anything. And therefore, the two-state solution is no good. The one-state solution is no good. Nothing is good except, it seems, ethnic cleansing, removing the Palestinians out of Gaza to start with, and then the West Bank. And this is how it could finish. So therefore, I don't see a way out if Israel and the backed by the United States, continues to go in this direction.
Mr. Husseini, do you think that Mahmoud Abbas has shown the leadership and been a partner, or could have been the sort of partner that could have stepped up now? And you know, we know that the previous administration in the United States looked to the PA as a potential partner and thought perhaps they could take over the Gaza Strip. But do you think that they have stepped up?
Well, I think for the last 20 years, since Mahmoud Abbas took over from Yasser Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas has tried his best to talk about peace and two states and living together side by side in security and peace and so on. He has tried his best. He has always talked the language of peace, but there was no response, basically. On the contrary, we know that the problem is that Netanyahu has actually supported Hamas by giving them money so that he keeps a division between Abbas and Hamas, and therefore he will always say the Palestinians are not united, and therefore I have no partner to speak to. So Abbas has tried his best, but unfortunately, Mr. Netanyahu wanted to discredit him and discredit every Palestinian that ever wants to ask for anything, two-state solution or any other solution that can bring peace to the Palestinians and independence with it.
Do you think that the two-state solution is currently dead in the water, or there is a way to revive it, given the pressure that you know, the region is now facing from Donald Trump, who is, you know, saying, "Well, I'll take over the Gaza Strip," because there doesn't seem to be a solution to this conflict?
Well, the two-state solution is in intensive care now. It's very difficult to revive it because neither the Israeli government, led by Netanyahu, nor the American president, who is leading the world, wants it. So how would it happen? And therefore, what is the other alternative? This is the problem. What is the alternative for a two-state solution? One-state solution, of course, Israel would not accept, because then the Palestinians would become equal citizens in one state with the Jewish population. And therefore, it seems that there's agreement that the only solution is ethnic cleansing out of Gaza and then out of the West Bank, and then finish the Palestinians as the Native Americans were finished, as the Aborigines in Australia were finished, and so on and so forth. This is the solution, it seems, from the point of view of the Americans and the Israelis.
Mr. Husseini, what do you think? I mean, I've only have a minute left on this segment, but in your opinion, what needs to happen then?
Well, I think the world has to unite and force a solution on this. This is one of the greatest injustices that took place in the 20th century. The Palestinians were the native population, were the majority of the population, 90% of the population in 1917 when the British took over, and therefore they deserve at least part of their land as their independent state. And therefore, without that, a big injustice happens. The Palestinians will say, we have nothing to lose but our chains, and the Arab population surrounding Israel will not be accepting of Israel, and war will continue and carry on until eternity, it seems.
Okay, we're grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, Donald Trump begins his plans to dismantle the Department of Education, but could he actually succeed?
The Chancellor is looking for ways to promote growth.
Today, I want to talk about economic growth.
What plans will Rachel Reeves forecast for this spring?
Our growth prospects.
And will they bloom?
To British growth for growth, driving economic growth.
Get the full story first on Sky News.
Growth is the #1 mission.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran? No. Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back. We're more than 60 days into Donald Trump's presidency, but his ability to inspire shock and awe remains. His latest dramatic move, signing an executive order to close the Department of Education. Naturally, it's provoking some questions. How would it impact children? Why would Trump do it? And is it even legal? Tonight, we want to try to answer all of those questions. We're also going to talk about the wider conversation in America right now about Donald Trump's fight with the justice system. Across the country, judges have been ruling against the legality of Trump's plans, from the mass deportations of immigrants to revoking birthright citizenship. Even in the hour before we came on air, a federal judge blocked Elon Musk's government efficiency team from accessing social security data. We've already seen the president crack down on protests at university campuses and threaten to punish colleagues that fail to do what he wants. Detractors say this is an administration failing to live up to its own ideals of free speech. When those plans were announced, we asked why. Again tonight, as Trump threatens to rip up the education system, we're asking the same question. Why? Over the weekend, the president called for a federal judge to be impeached. It sparked fears that we could be heading towards a flashpoint, a moment where Trump tests the power of the legal system to such an extent that the country's plunged into a constitutional crisis. Where would that leave the United States and the rule of law? Some answers in a moment. First, here's tonight's announcement on education. Have a look.
I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all. And it sounds strange, doesn't it? Department of Education, we're going to eliminate it. And everybody knows it's right. And the Democrats know it's right, and I hope they're going to be voting for it because ultimately it may come before them. But everybody knows it's right, and we have to get our children educated. We're not doing well with the world of education in this country, and we haven't for a long time.
That was Donald Trump in the hour before we came on air. So what are Donald Trump's education plans? A long-term plan of his and other Republican allies has been to dismantle the Department of Education. The department is responsible for overseeing funding for public schools, student loans, and running programs for low-income students. Curriculums are left to the individual states and local school districts. Republicans have historically pushed against centralizing education policy. Some have accused the department for pushing what they describe as woke political ideology onto children. And the person tasked with the job, the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, a former WWE promoter, Ms. McMahon has already cut the workforce in half. She's backed Trump's plans as the final mission of the department. In his first 60 days, Donald Trump has also threatened to cut funding for universities that allow what he calls illegal protests on campus. He also announced a task force to tackle alleged anti-Semitism at 10 major universities. The president has also said he'll prosecute and deport foreign students who participate in campus unrest. Let's bring in our correspondent, David Blevins. David, good to see you. So first of all, does the president even have the power to do this?
Well, Yalda, in a word, no. To completely scrap the Department of Education would require congressional support, which Donald Trump doesn't have right now. But by signing this executive order to facilitate the dismantling of the department, he is able to claim that he has fulfilled another of his campaign promises. A campaign promise driven entirely, as you point out, by ideology. Very interesting today, while he was signing, to note among the audience Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, a man we've heard much about in the past, because, of course, he's been at the forefront of the pushback against any suggestion that children should be educated around LGBTQ+ issues. Who could forget the famous 2023 Don't Say Gay bill in Florida? So Donald Trump really doesn't have the ability to do this, the power to do this, but like so many other things, he's finding a way to circumvent that, or to at least claim he's circumventing that, and that is absolutely going to bring a string of legal challenges.
Yeah, a string of legal challenges as well as tension between his administration and the judicial system, which we've been seeing sort of unfold over the course of the last few weeks.
That's absolutely right. Last weekend, the Trump administration invoked a 200-year-old law, the Alien Enemies Act, only supposed to be used at time of war and invasion, to justify the deportation of more than 200 alleged members of a Venezuelan crime gang to El Salvador, and that incurred the wrath of a district judge who had imposed a stay on that decision. Now, that judge is demanding answers from the administration. They are claiming the flights had already taken off before he made his decision. And we're now hearing that the administration is considering invoking the state secrets privilege. In other words, granting them the opportunity to avoid the judge's questions altogether. And I suppose when you put all of those things together with the fact that today Elon Musk, Donald Trump's right-hand man, gave $6,000+ to each member of Congress who supported Donald Trump's call for judges to be impeached, you begin to see why Democrats are suggesting we're already in the throes of a constitutional crisis in the United States.
David, thanks so much for bringing us up to date. Now, in a moment, we'll get some political reaction to Trump's latest move. Democratic Congressman John Larson made headlines last week for accusing his Republican colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee of allowing the president and Elon Musk to make such radical changes. Have a listen.
You will do whatever Elon Musk and Donald Trump tell you to do. Where's the independence of the committee? Where's the legislature? We're an equal branch of government. And you start off with a blather, and yet look at the empty seats here. Where's Elon Musk? I'm sure he's a genius and is a very credible person because of the wealth he's accumulated. But that does not put him above the law or the responsibility to come before this committee in this Congress. If he's so great, if these plans and all the fraud and abuse that he's found are so eminent, why isn't he here explaining it? You know why. Because he's out to privatize.
Well, Congressman John Larson joins me now. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. I mean, clearly, there was a lot of anger there that you were showing. Just talk us through that moment.
Look, a little blood pressure, right? Well,
Yeah,
listen, Yalda, I think that in your opening statements as well, there's no question, that Trump is a master of distraction, number one. And so he puts out repeatedly these things that infuriate today's latest Department of Education, et cetera. And everybody, including the media, will be scurrying this way. He cares about one thing. And that's what he's brought Elon Musk for as well. He wants to take that $2 trillion tax cut and make it permanent. It ends and it expires this year in 2025. It's no coincidence that he asked Elon Musk to find $2 trillion. And while Trump continues to say that he's not going to touch Social Security or Medicare, Elon Musk is on Larry Kudlow and every other talk show talking about how it's necessary to privatize these agencies because that's where more than 70% of the budget exists in Medicare, Social Security, and the National Defense Program. And for the United States Congress not to do its job and hold him accountable and bring Elon Musk before us is absurd and beyond recall. And Republicans are going to continue to hear this from every member of Congress. And I hope their colleagues now join us and understand that this is exactly what needs to be done.
I mean, there are a number of things there that I'd like to talk about. You talked there about Donald Trump trying to just distract and have everyone focused on one issue and not the real issues. But also, importantly, you talked about the fact that Congress is not stepping up and speaking up, perhaps the way that you did last week. How much damage do you think then that will do in the long run? Because, I mean, we're only 8 weeks in at this point.
Well, I hold a lot of frequent town halls, and more than one person stood up, including a Holocaust survivor last year, a Holocaust survivor last night, got up and spoke and said, this is starting to look like Germany in the 30s. And I know that sometimes a lot is made of this, but the fact of the matter is, when you can give somebody who's not accountable to Congress, that didn't have to be approved by the United States Senate, that doesn't have to disclose any of his information when he is already dealing with the United States government, and neither do any of his Doge employees. What gives them that right? It is legal to have a special assistant, but it is not legal to have someone not come before the Congress and be accountable for their proposals and what they're doing. And why is it that these Doge employees can have access to people's information and data, and we don't even know who they are?
Congressman,
we being Congress.
Congressman, are you disappointed in the Democrats? I mean, where are they? They seem to be still licking their wounds.
Well, I think there's a couple of general theories that exist out there. One of them being they're doing so many things wrong, give them enough rope to hang themselves. And that's usually a look that can be taken with regard to Congress, which moves slower. Trump and Musk know that they only have about 11 months to get done what they want to do. Their focus is privatization, and they are moving extraordinarily fast, which is why Congress has got to step up. I think all Democrats are on the same page. It's just a question of now bringing clarity to this. And thankfully, for the media and these moments, now the citizens are beginning to step in and start to clamor for this. That's what will ultimately wake up the Congress, especially the majority in the House and the Senate.
Congressman, I also wanted to get your reaction to reports that have come in today that Elon Musk paid or donated to the campaigns of certain members of Congress up to $6,500 or so. Those members of Congress that have showed support for impeaching judges.
That's just the beginning. I think Elon Musk is fascinated with his new power. I think he's fascinated with this authority that he has and the fact that he's unaccountable. The truth of the matter is that he needs to be brought before us. It's also, he has now figured out that he's going to not only influence Congress, but boards of education, local town councils and mayors and state legislative bodies, because he sees this as a path forward. It started with the $250 million that he gave Donald Trump, but he's also fascinated with this new power that he has. For him to appear with chainsaws on TV is disgusting because he feels like he doesn't have to be accountable or come before this democracy. That's why I think people should be very concerned. It's the threat to our very democracy. Nobody, I'm sure that he's a genius. I'm sure that he's a very bright and capable person, but he's not above the law. And he's not above answering to the American people. Our preamble starts off to the Constitution with "we the people," and we the people demand that he come forward and give us the answers.
Congressman, really great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you, Yalda.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the program, how the Prime Minister sees a new generation of nuclear subs as a blueprint for defence for decades to come.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Let's go to the war in Ukraine now and the ongoing effort to reach a peace deal. Today, Volodymyr Zelensky stressed the need for continued pressure on Russia, while the Prime Minister said it's essential members of his so-called coalition of the willing are ready to react quickly if a ceasefire deal is agreed. After an inspection of one of Britain's nuclear submarines, the Prime Minister spent the afternoon meeting military chiefs to develop a plan for a peacekeeping force if there's an end to the war and the Russians back down on the use of NATO troops. Our Defence and Security Editor Deborah Haynes has this report.
The first public signs of a so-called coalition of the willing in action. Senior officers from more than 30 nations meeting in the UK to work up plans for an international force to help secure any ceasefire in Ukraine. The war zone mapped out. Britain's Prime Minister also in the room.
And now is the time to be doing this. We don't know what the outcome of any talks is going to be.
The UK and France want to build a reassurance force to deter further Russian attacks by land, sea and air if the fighting stops. But it's a race against time as Donald Trump pushes for Moscow and Kyiv to declare peace.
It is vitally important that we do that work because we know one thing for certain, which is a deal without anything behind it is something that Putin will breach. We know that because it's happened before, and I'm absolutely clear in my mind it will happen again.
The government has chosen to take a leading role in the creation of this coalition of the willing, but the greatest will in the world won't deter Russia without hard military power. Decades of defence cuts here means Britain could only muster a few thousand troops for Ukraine, supported by a handful of jets and even fewer warships. It's an important reality check for an operation that's being planned without direct US military support, given that the UK's limited capabilities are far greater than those of most European allies. Important too to remember the UK is also a nuclear power, a status the Prime Minister chose to showcase this week as he boarded one of the Royal Navy's 4 nuclear-armed submarines. HMS Vanguard had just returned from a lengthy patrol. Filming on board is very rare and strictly controlled. It's why all sound was removed. But the fact this footage was released at all will doubtless catch Russia's attention.
Madam President.
Committed to working with Washington on peace plans, Ukraine's president beamed into a meeting of EU leaders with a warning about Vladimir Putin.
One moment they give their word, and a few hours later it means absolutely nothing. That's why we must keep pushing Russia toward peace together with you, of course, with the United States and with our partners. We can do this.
In Ukraine, Russian attacks still pound this country. More peace talks are planned, but no evidence yet of any desire by Moscow to cease fire. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Now, it's arguably the biggest job in world sport, and for the first time, a woman is taking charge. Zimbabwean champion swimmer Kirsty Coventry has been elected president of the International Olympic Committee. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris was in Greece for the vote and has this on what she has planned. Have a listen.
Mrs. Kirsty Coventry.
From double Olympic champion to president of the Olympic movement, the first from Africa and the first woman, Kirsty Coventry shattering another glass ceiling in sport.
This is not just a huge honor, but it is a reminder of my commitment to every single one of you that I will lead this organization with so much pride, with the values at the core.
It was a resounding victory, unexpectedly seeing off all 6 rivals in the first round, with 49 of the 97 votes. A humiliating 3rd place for Sebastian Coe, with only 8 backers. Perhaps he was too disruptive, promoting prize money for medalists too divisive.
It's a disappointing result, but that's what happens when you go into elections. It's pretty clear that the athletes, and in particular the female members, voted for her in very big numbers in the first round.
This seemed a win for the continuity candidate, closely aligned with the incumbent Thomas Bach.
After her historic victory, Kirsty Coventry now prepares to lead the Olympics in a turbulent world, with so many political, not just sporting challenges confronting the IOC.
Particularly with the next Summer Olympics in LA in 2028 and all the unpredictability of Donald Trump to deal with. But Coventry has been Zimbabwe's sports minister for 7 years.
I have been dealing with, let's say, difficult men in high positions since I was 20 years old. And my firm belief is that President Trump is a huge lover of sports.
Donald Trump has said transgender women should be banned from women's sport at the Olympics. Will you comply with him, or are you willing to stand up to him and say you won't be ordered around?
It's going to take communication. We're going to create a task force that's going to look at the transgender issue and the protection of the female category.
Big decisions facing Kirsty Coventry in the most prestigious and powerful position in sport.
Congratulations, well done.
Thank you.
Rob Harris, Sky News, Costa Navarino in Greece.
Now, this week, there has been a national conversation about the risks of social media, in part due to the release of the British Netflix crime drama Adolescence. Centred on a 13-year-old boy accused of murder, the miniseries examines misogynistic incel culture and the use of social media in bullying. It's even been on at number 10. Have a listen.
We are watching Adolescence with our children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and it's a very, very good documentary to watch, or drama. This violence carried out by young men, influenced by what they see online, is a real problem. It's abhorrent, and we have to tackle it.
The Prime Minister there, well, it's raised questions once more about how well-equipped children and indeed adults are to cope with our growing levels of social media consumption and harmful content online. Well, with me is Marine Tanguy, author of The Visual Detox, How to Consume Media Without Letting It Consume You. Marine, really good to see you. I mean, let's just talk about this series, Adolescence, because I feel like it's really captured the imagination of people, not just in this country, but right across the globe. I mean, I was just in India, people were talking about it. People I know in the United States are talking about it, in Australia. And it really does boil down to the sort of shaping of young children's minds on social media, on the sort of visuals that they're exposed to.
Yes, and I think what's really interesting is that it touches on both visual biases. So just to take a step back, Jamie Miller, the main character, is looking at heavy visuals of toxic masculinity, which are emulated by Andrew Tate. And in fact, why we want to blame Andrew Tate, let's not forget that main advertisers and large corporates still advertise that masculinity on a daily basis. And he's also looking at loads of images of models, which is also a hyper-objectification of our gender. This leads sadly to quite a tragic outcome onto the Netflix. But what I found really interesting here is twofold. Is one, how visuals can become addictive and literally shapes you to become a certain person or wishing to do actions that are absolutely drastic. The other thing is actually also a class conversation. So to give you an idea, 4 out of 5 billboards in the UK are in working class areas. So who will be mostly targeted with those biases and those commercial images are ones from low income, which are even more likely to therefore be, into that populistic statement.
Your research has found that we're exposed to something like 10,000 images a day. What is that doing to the mind?
Well, I mean, you're experiencing it more than anybody else. So you're looking at 10,000 images a day. From everything that we say right now, we remember 15% of it, which I'm sure you won't take personally. But from everything that you see daily, you remember 60% of it. So you actually memorize visually substantially more than you actually listen. And what's interesting is, and you know that with kids, they mimic. We mimic what other people do. And we're in a world that is increasingly visual, especially with the rise of AI. We're like, by 2050, 75% of images we're going to consume will be AI generated. So it's important to pay attention to what am I seeing? What is the impact ultimately of those images on my brain, on me? But also what are the main actions this is conducting me to do? Because back to the conversation on adolescence, like the main values we are currently seeing are consumption, are gender biases reinforced, are like this instant gratifications, and are the power dynamics. Like that's what we're seeing as we're commuting to work. We need to start inserting new types of visual narratives in those conversations.
And leaders, politicians, people in positions of power are using images to manipulate minds as well. This is something that you've looked into.
Yes, I mean, I think what's really interesting is it used to be really, visual misinformation used to be the land of Iran, who spend loads of money on it, or Russia, or places, as you know, who democracy is not quite embraced. What's really interesting nowadays is that you've seen with President Trump and the Gaza video that actually this is in Western democracy, that you can see something that's an AI video that is complete visual misinformation that is widely spread and endorsed by the higher ranks of our democracies. That's, again, even more so why visual literacy really matters, because we need to understand where's the source, what was the first intent of that image, who created it and why, and then how was it spread, what the impact will that be, what are the consequences. That is what visual literacy can help you do.
And you've talked a little bit about AI, but the fact remains, I mean, when studies have been done at some of the most elite universities in the United States, their top students couldn't decipher between what was real and what was not. And we're going to see a lot more of that flooding of images that are fake, frankly, and people won't be able to tell the difference.
And I think that's something I want to take from adolescence, is that we're looking at a 13-year-old boy here, but realistically, you and I can't decipher between an AI image or not. 80% of people can't. That's not just a question of young people. At large, we are totally visually non-literate and cannot see which softwares have been used for those images. That's also why I would highly advise to use TNI, which is like a reverse search image, and check again the source and check and try to analyze the images that we get exposed to, especially in geopolitical conflicts. But I don't think that's just a use problem. I think it's at large a problem that all of us should be visually literate.
So you've written this book about, it's titled Visual Detox. How do you, as a young person, separate yourself from it when it's just around you and consumes you and is targeting you?
Yes, I think as parents, as we know, and so here's a bit of hope, because it's important too, is that millennial parents are substantially better at implementing control tools or safety tools when it comes to the platforms that they're using. They're also substantially better at having those conversations. So first, ad blockers. Sounds stupid, but just put ad blockers absolutely everywhere. Second, I think you can't just walk around with hands on your eyes, but you can learn to understand what is the impact of that image on me? Silly things. If you aggress me with words, I can recognize this as an aggression. But actually, images can aggress you on a daily basis and you might not recognize it. So recognizing the impact that images have on you is incredibly critical. Yeah. And the second thing would be, think of it, especially in cities, as your civic spaces. Where ultimately you go.
I've got 20 seconds to go. But I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, Maureen. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for watching tonight's programme. Of course, we'll be back again next week. The news at 10 with Gillian is next. Goodbye.